Hey there, welcome to the deep dive. So ever wonder about those physical symptoms, like chronic pain, maybe fatigue? What if it's not just about tissue damage? What if it's, well, more like a story your body's holding on to? Today, we're really diving into that connection, between trauma and physical health. How the body, quite literally, carries the burden. And our main source for this deep dive, it's the work of Dr. Robert C. Scaer, specifically his book, The Body Bears the Burden, Trauma, Dissociation, and Disease. He's a neurologist, brings a really fascinating angle, blending the psychological and the biological.
Yeah, he has this deep clinical background. It's quite a perspective.
Right, exactly.
And what we really want to do today is unpack his model. It's quite integrated. He draws these really strong links, sometimes quite surprising links, between trauma and that feeling of being disconnected, dissociation, and then all these chronic physical issues.
Seems like a big leap for some things.
It can seem that way at first. But we're going to explore how things that seem totally separate might, well, actually be connected at the root.
Okay, so the plan is, first, get clear on trauma itself in this context.
Right.
Then look at the body's automatic survival stuff.
Fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah, that. And what happens when it goes wrong? Get stuck.
And how that manifests.
And then how that might show up, maybe years down the line, as physical pain, chronic conditions, that kind of thing.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea, trauma. According to Scaer, what is it? Is it just the big, obvious, terrible events?
Well, not necessarily just those. He argues the crucial thing isn't just the event itself, but the meaning it has for the person.
The meaning,
Okay.
yes.
The book defines trauma as basically anything that feels like a threat to your survival as a human being.
A threat to survival.
Wow.
Wow, that's fundamental.
It really is. And the way it hits you, he suggests, is by breaking through this sort of invisible shield, a perceptual boundary. Yeah, think of it like the bubble that separates your safe sense of self from the outside world. It starts really small, with your first caregivers, your parents maybe, and then it expands out as you grow.
I see.
And Scaer makes a point that trauma caused by another person can be particularly damaging
Why is that?
because it shatters that safety within our own species. It breaches the boundary close to home, so to speak. And the closer the threat feels like, experiencing it yourself is worse than witnessing it,
Yeah.
which is worse than just learning about it, the bigger the potential impact on that feeling of safety.
So it's not just about how bad the event looks from the outside,
Exactly.
but how you perceive it, especially given your own history, your own boundaries.
Precisely. And that helps explain why one person might, shake something off relatively easily,
Mm-hmm.
while for another person, the same event is deeply traumatizing. It lands differently.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about the body's reaction when it does perceive a threat, the automatic stuff. Fight or flight, we all know that one.
Right, the classic response.
Right.
It's your body's ancient survival kit kicking into high gear. Your brain flags danger, and boom, you get that rush of adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine.
Yeah, heart pounds, muscles tense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar, muscle tone, alertness, everything ramps up. Ready for intense action, fight or run.
And this is all coordinated by the brain.
Absolutely. Specific areas jump in. The amygdala acts like the alarm bell.
A danger signal.
Right. That triggers the hypothalamus and another spot called the locus coeruleus. They activate the sympathetic nervous system, your go system, and something called the HPA axis.
HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal.
That's the one. Think of it as the body's emergency broadcast system. It releases cortisol, the main stress hormone. It's a brilliant system, really, designed for quick, short bursts of activity to get you out of trouble.
What if you can't fight and you can't flee? Which happens a lot in human situations, right?
Yeah, exactly. That brings us to the third response, freeze.
The deer in headlights thing.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's seen all through the animal kingdom. When escape or fighting is impossible, the body just immobilizes, stops. But here's the fascinating part Scaer points out. Externally, they look still, frozen. But internally, there's a massive amount of metabolic energy still revved up, ready to go.
So it's not relaxed. It's like paused potential energy.
Exactly. And crucially, in animals, if they survive the threat after freezing, they discharge that energy.
Oh.
You see it trembling, shaking, deep breaths, a physical release. They literally shake it off.
And this is all instinct, right? Not conscious thought, just pure physiology for survival.
Pure physiology. Fight, flight, freeze. It's all baked in. But here's where Scaer talks about the human anomaly.
Uh-oh. What do we do differently?
We often stop that physical discharge. We inhibit the shaking, the trembling.
Why? Do we learn to suppress it? Like, keep it together?
That's likely part of it. The book suggests social conditioning, cultural restraint,
Mm.
or maybe just our higher brain function stepping in and overriding the instinct.
So we freeze, but we don't unfreeze properly.
We might freeze internally, feel paralyzed, but try to look calm on the outside. And that inhibited freeze, that stuck energy, that often shows up in humans as dissociation.
Dissociation. Okay, define that more. It's not just zoning out.
No, it's deeper. It's a real sense of detachment, feeling numb, confused, like you're watching things happen from a distance. Maybe time feels weirdly slow.
That out-of-body feeling people sometimes describe.
That too. And interestingly, the book notes pain perception can drop significantly during dissociation, probably due to endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, which are part of that freeze cocktail. So Scaer defines dissociation as this unconscious process where your mental functions kind of separate, like your feelings might disconnect from your thoughts about what's happening.
Okay, this feels like a really key point. He's saying this stuck freeze, this dissociation, this is the starting point for the problems later.
That's exactly the argument.
Yeah.
But this unresolved freeze response, the state of dissociation, is the physiological trigger. It initiates changes in the central nervous system.
That can lead to PTSD.
Yes, and potentially, according to Scaer, many chronic physical diseases too. The body basically gets stuck with the emergency brakes half on, holding that survival pattern.
Wow. Okay. And the stuckness affects memory too, right?
Hugely. It's not just about forgetting details. Trauma often scrambles memory, makes it fragmented. Scaer explains it messes with what's called declarative memory. That's your conscious recall, the story you can tell about what happened. It's linked to the hippocampus.
So the narrative gets fuzzy.
Right. But, and this is critical, it actually enhances non-declarative memory, often called procedural memory.
Procedural, like riding a bike, muscle memory.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
It's unconscious memory for skills, habits, and crucially, for automatic physical reactions and sensations.
So you might not remember the sequence of events clearly.
Right.
But your body remembers the feeling of fear, the way your muscles tensed up, the impulse to run or freeze, the actual physical sensations.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
At an unconscious level, your body learned a survival routine in that moment, and it remembers the steps implicitly. And this leads to something Scaer calls kindling.
Kindling, like starting a fire.
Sort of. Trauma sensitizes those brain circuits involved in arousal and procedural memory. The amygdala, locus coeruleus we talked about, makes them hyper-reactive.
Like turning up the sensitivity dial.
Precisely. It creates this powerful feedback loop. So later on, even a tiny cue, something vaguely related to the original trauma, a sound, a smell, even just a feeling in your body.
Can trip that hypersensitive wire.
Exactly. And suddenly you get this intense arousal, and the body reactivates that whole stored survival program, the sensations, the impulses. And the book really stresses brain plasticity here. Trauma, especially early in life, can cause potentially permanent shifts in how these circuits are wired.
So these reactions become hardwired.
In a very real sense, yes. These conditioned emotional and physical responses become ingrained, very resistant to just talking yourself out of them.
That really drives home the point. This isn't just psychological, it's physiology. It's changes in the brain and body structure and function.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's connect the dots. How does this stored pattern, this kindled hyperreactive system, translate into actual physical symptoms, sometimes appearing way later?
Right. This is the core of the body bears the burden. Scaer argues that the unresolved freeze, the dissociation, and this kindled trauma circuitry have profound effects on physical health. That stored pattern, the defensive posture, the bracing, the pain signals, the sensations from the traumatic moment, it's all held in procedural memory.
The body's how-to guide for that threat.
Yes. And it can get triggered later, leading to ongoing pain and physical problems. And the key thing to grasp is this pain or dysfunction isn't necessarily because there's current tissue damage.
It's the memory running the show.
It's the body acting as if the original threat is still happening, running that old survival program over and over.
Okay, let's make this concrete. What are some examples from the book of common physical issues linked to this?
Sure. Scaer provides quite a few. Chronic pain is a major one. He sees it as deeply tied to these brain changes and that tendency to dissociate under stress. Myofascial pain, that persistent muscle pain that can be so hard to treat.
Yeah, very common.
He describes it as potentially a chronic self-feeding loop. Kindled arousal keeps triggering the procedural memory of muscle bracing from the trauma.
Wow.
He gives a really striking example. Persistent pain deep in the hip, in the piriformis muscle, potentially linked to the body's unconscious bracing during past sexual trauma.
That's specific.
It highlights how specific the body's memory can be.
Okay, what else?
Whiplash. Scaer uses this almost as a classic case study.
From car accidents, usually.
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is, the symptoms, neck pain, sure, but also fatigue, brain fog, dizziness, even TMJ or emotional issues, they often seem way out of proportion to the actual physical impact, medically speaking.
Right, doctors sometimes struggle to explain the severity of persistence.
Exactly. Scaer argues this cluster of symptoms is a kind of universal pattern. It's what happens when that instinctive defensive response to sudden threat gets activated and doesn't resolve, especially if the person was already vulnerable. The body braces for impact, gets stuck in that brace, and you get whiplash symptoms, even from a seemingly minor incident.
So the stuck response is the main issue, not just the initial jolt.
That's the idea. Then there's fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS.
Often grouped together.
And the book points out, look at the symptoms, the pain, fatigue, cognitive issues. They overlap significantly with whiplash and PTSD symptoms.
Interesting.
Plus, there's often a high rate of prior trauma found in people diagnosed with fibro or CFS, and similar HPA axis dysregulation, that stress system being out of whack.
Okay, another connection.
Then there's RSD-CRPS reflex sympathetic dystrophy or complex regional pain syndrome. This one's really perplexing medically. Intense, bizarre pain, swelling, skin changes.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
Scaer suggests this could be an extreme manifestation, maybe involving deep dissociation in a limb or body part, kindled pain memory, and severe autonomic nervous system dysfunction, like blood flow going haywire in that area.
So the dissociation itself might lead to physical tissue changes.
That's the hypothesis presented. It's seen as a potential prototype for how deep trauma patterns can affect physiology.
Yeah.
Also, somatization disorders. This is where emotional pain gets expressed physically.
Like unexplained physical symptoms.
Yeah, often seen in survivors of childhood abuse who might not have clear verbal memories or struggle to talk about it. Scaer argues these aren't just in-the-head symptoms. They can reflect real physiological changes tied to that trauma physiology. The chronic arousal, the haywire autonomic system, the dissociation.
The body speaks when words fail.
Something like that. And finally, the book touches on other potential links. Things often called diseases of stress like IBS, maybe peptic ulcers, hypertension.
Right, blood pressure.
Right, even potentially some autoimmune conditions. Could these also be influenced by the constant low-level or high-level activation of this unresolved trauma response messing with body systems over time?
It opens up a whole different way of looking at chronic illness.
It really does. And it highlights vulnerability. Not everyone reacts the same. Prior trauma, especially in childhood, can create this state of sensitization, Scaer says. It lowers your threshold.
Makes you more susceptible.
Yes. So a later event, maybe something seemingly minor like a fender bender, could trigger a massive response against PTSD, severe physical symptoms, because it lands on that already sensitized system. Again, the meaning layered on past experience is crucial.
That really flies in the face of thinking only huge disasters cause PTSD.
It broadens the definition significantly, and it touches on re-traumatization, why treating people with extensive trauma histories can be so complex. They might be very sensitive, requiring really careful approaches.
You mentioned vulnerability. What about unexpected sources of trauma the book points out? Things we might not typically think of.
Yeah, there are a few important ones. One is medical trauma, the healthcare system itself.
How so?
Well, think about diagnostic procedures, surgery, just feeling powerless or invaded in a hospital setting. For someone already vulnerable, this could be intensely re-traumatizing.
Right, the loss of control.
Exactly. Then there's awareness under anesthesia.
Oh, wow, that sounds terrifying.
Scaer calls it an ultimate expression of trauma. Being aware, but totally paralyzed, helpless. Even without feeling physical pain, the sheer terror often leads to PTSD.
Just the helplessness itself.
Yes. And perhaps most importantly, pediatric medical trauma.
Procedures on babies and kids.
Yes. For a long time, the thinking was, well, infants don't really process or remember pain like adults. Scaer argues that's profoundly wrong.
I can imagine.
Invasive procedures at birth, early surgeries, separations. These could deeply impact a developing brain and nervous system, potentially setting patterns for life.
That's a heavy thought. Okay, shifting slightly. The book also talks about reenactment, how trauma can lead people to unconsciously repeat patterns.
Yes. This connects back to that implicit procedural memory. The body remembers cues. Scaer explains how stored memories of things from the time of the trauma, maybe the light, certain sounds, smells, Even internal states like hormonal cycles can unconsciously trigger anniversary reactions.
Like feeling inexplicably bad around the date of the original event.
Exactly. Unexplained physical symptoms or emotional distress popping up, even if you're not consciously thinking about the trauma, the body remembers the timing.
You've given examples, right?
Yeah, powerful ones. Like a patient whose minor car accident suddenly unearthed intense PTSD symptoms tied to childhood abuse from decades earlier. The body connected the dots unconsciously.
Or the woman whose chiropractic neck adjustment triggered panic linked to a past assault.
Right. The specific movement or sensation was the trigger for the stored memory. And another form of potential reenactment discussed is risk-taking.
Like extreme sports.
Potentially, yeah. The book links the neurochemistry, the adrenaline rush, arousal, combined with the endorphin release, reward, pain relief, that comes with facing danger or extreme exertion. It
Links that to the trauma cycle.
suggests it might be an unconscious attempt to recreate that familiar physiological state of high arousal, followed by the calm or reward of endorphins. This cycle could, in theory, drive some repetitive risky behaviors.
Like the runner's high connection.
Similar principle endorphins triggered by exertion and pushing through pain. It's that exertion reward cycle again.
Okay, so if trauma is held so deeply in the body, in these unconscious patterns, how do you heal it? What does the book suggest about therapy?
Well, it suggests that just talking about it, while valuable for understanding, might not be enough to change the underlying physiology.
The cognitive approach might not reach the procedural memory.
That's the implication. Healing, in this view, needs to access those unconscious, body-based levels where the trauma response lives.
Mm.
So the book mentions somatic therapies, body-focused therapies, like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing,
Heard of that one.
and somatic experiencing, or SE.
Mm-hmm.
SE specifically is based on that animal model, discharging the freeze response. It focuses on guiding attention to the felt sense.
The physical sensations.
Yeah, the body sensations connected to the traumatic memory. The goal is to help the body safely complete that interrupted survival response, release the stored energy, often through small, titrated physical movements, or allowing trembling, shaking.
So working with the body's physical expression, not just talking about the event.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It sounds different from traditional talk therapy. The book even notes similarities between some methods in these therapies and older ritualistic healing practices.
Interesting, suggesting they tap into some deep brain-body mechanisms through specific actions and focused awareness.
Possibly. And of course, the book also acknowledges the role of medication, pharmacotherapy. SRIs, like sertraline, can help manage PTSD symptoms, the numbing, the hyperarousal, the re-experiencing by influencing brain chemistry.
Right, as part of a broader approach.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been quite a deep dive. Let's try to wrap it up. We've explored Dr. Scaer's model, really showing trauma isn't just, a bad memory, it's a physical imprint. It leaves its mark on our physiology, our unconscious memory, even the physical structure of the brain.
Yeah, and this model offers a way to understand some of those really persistent, maybe medically unexplained symptoms, chronic pain, fatigue, others, linking them back to these unresolved survival responses, the body's procedural memory of threat still being active.
I think the big takeaway is just how deeply integrated mind and body are. The body really does bear the burden. Recognizing that connection feels crucial for how we look at health, illness, healing, everything, really.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, based on all this. Consider this idea of body memory. How might acknowledging that your physical feelings, your gut reactions, maybe even some of your patterns of behaviors, how might acknowledging they could be linked to an old story your body is holding? How might that shift your perspective on your own well-being or how you approach healing for yourself or even how you understand others?
Something definitely worth reflecting on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into The Body Bears the Burden. We hope it's giving you some valuable new perspectives.